Hello and welcome back to Europa Universalis 4. I am Lord Forwind, here with a requested guide on Bohemia. I thought I had done this earlier, but it turns out I haven't done this guide. So, Bohemia, actually one of the more stable countries in the entire game due to their events and stuff. But let's first go over where they are. They start off in the HRE. They are in fact in a interregum, or intergum, depending on how you say it. They are the only kingdom within the HRE, and they also are an elector. So your ruler will be a king elector of the HRE, or a queen elector in that case. They start off as, I believe, actually a richer nation than Austria. Let me just double check that, but I'm pretty sure they are a larger nation than Austria. Oops, wrong way. Actually, no, Austria seems to be a little bit larger than them, but 60 development. But more importantly than that, you also possess another gold mine, which puts you relatively on par with the Austrians in Tyrol. And the reason I'm talking about Austria is because Austria is your main rival for the throne of the HRE. You have already got one vote that you can cast for yourself, and it's relatively easy to secure the loyalties of one or two of the electors. Some people you might want to consider as allies. Depending on how you want to expand, Brandenburg and Saxony are right on your borders, and so long as they haven't really rivaled each other, which they have in this case, they are relatively good allies. If you had to pick between them, I would rather ally Saxony and invade Brandenburg, just so there's no chance of the mighty Prussian armies coming into existence. Usually you can get an alliance with either Trier, Cologne, or Mainz. Sorry if none of those are correct. But the Palatinate is another viable ally. They do have a province that borders yours, which you might want to retake at some point, but they never tend to expand that much. You can, in fact, ally yourself to Austria. Some people would say you should try and kill Austria, because if you kill Austria, then you virtually have no rivals within the HRE. But Austria is actually surprisingly stubborn and refuses to die for quite some time. Also, it's much easier to kill Austria once you've stolen the throne of the HRE away from them, and allying the Emperor will give you a lot more safety to expand in the HRE, since they won't do unlawful territory unless you really offend them. Other thing to note is you do have a vassal over here. You have Silesia, which actually has a fair amount of development if you actually look at it. How much development do they technically have? They have 38 development, which is no small number. Combined with that, you're not that far short of the Austrians. Plus, you have much better land. Where's simple terrain? In terms of simple terrain, you have farmlands, grasslands, compared to the Austria, who only has one farmland. You've got some of the better lands in terms of development and stuff within the HRE as well. Plus the aforementioned gold mine, which I recommend you boost up to like level 9 or 10 as soon as you can. Above that, the chance of it depleting goes up considerably. You also start off with a fairly large military that you can also expand further. Don't forget that Silesia will help you in your wars, and that is another 4 troops, and you can in fact pick how you want them to fight. If you pick like supportive, they will tend to stay near your army, especially if you do, where's the option? Allow friendly armies to attach to this army. You can essentially just have them permanently added to your troops, and you're all good. You'll probably want to annex Silesia relatively early on. Be aware that when you annex Silesia, you will take not only a diplomatic reputation hit, but you will also, I believe, get it's either a 50 or a 75 penalty of all nations in the HRE, because you've annexed a member of the HRE as well. So just be aware of that. If you're going for the imperial throne, that can very easily cost you the election. Not only is that worth mentioning, but it also is worth entering that the Austrians have a 29-year-old on the throne who's going to rule for quite some time. You currently have no ruler because you're in the interregum. So the first thing is to get yourself a king. Now, there are multiple ways of doing this, and the standard one is royal marriage somebody and you're good to go. But it's also important to note that, let's see, what is the actual requirement here? I actually figured this out. Between 1446 but before 1457, you're going to have the Hussite Rebellion, the return of the Hussites. Jerry Z. Podebrand is going to show up, more commonly known as just General Podebrand, and he will you can choose to switch to him, or you can choose to fight him. It's very difficult, actually, to fight him. Plus, he's a pretty good ruler, at least 533. I think it's actually gotten better since then. And you'll get a modifier that gives you essentially better tolerance to the true faith and higher infantry combatability, which you'll need because the Pope will try and declare crusades and stuff against you then. Not actual crusades, but other nations around you will want to attack you. And you've got multiple events that deal with the Hussites in the long run. Because the Hussites were kind of a precursor of the Protestant Reformation, accepting and tolerating the Hussite religion will push Protestantism, or rather the Protestant Reformation, sooner. Which can be good because Bohemia has quite a few events to convert their lands to Protestantism. And if you want to be emperor, though, you should stay Catholic, or you can go Protestant and try and win the HRE religious war and become emperor that way. Now, I keep talking about becoming emperor because that's, if you're in the HRE, that is usually your big goal because it gives you an insane amount of increased force limit and income and stuff. Plus the reforms, if you can form them all the way down to, revoke the privilegia, you get the endless vassal swarm. That is the HRE late game. And then if you revoke it, you'll form the HRE in general. But in terms of expansion, at the beginning of the game, you're relatively limited to either going into Bavaria, west into Würzburg, Saxony, or north into Brandenburg. Now, Brandenburg is usually worth killing, and their provinces are not that great, but if you can break through there, you can expand up to Pomerania, and thus have access to the sea and all these nice little nations up here, which is entirely viable. Or you wait, annex Silesia, and hope that Poland starts to collapse, and then you can invade Poland. In fact, you have some very good missions. You have complete the return of the Hussite ones, which will give you a permanent claim on Silesia, which you already own, which is kind of funny. And then you get a mission to integrate them, and you'll get a claim on, let's see, which is that? You'll get a claim on that glowing area of Poland, so 4 provinces in Poland right through there. Once you take that, you'll get a permanent claim on region up there towards Danzig and the Teutonic Order, Pomelian Reconquest, and it also wants you to build apparently a cathedral university, and you'll get some a big bonus in terms of you'll get 9 development in that province, which is pretty good. What else? You've got Imperial Ambition because you, of course, are in the HRE. Have 2 electors back you. You'll get an additional diplomat and improved relations. This can help you when you're making your final push to become emperor, but I wouldn't do it until the Austrian ruler either gets older, you have a very stable young ruler, which Podebrand is relatively young, and then once you've got all that, you can push your way down this tree. Once you become emperor, you can get a +3 diplomatic reputation, which is wonderful, and then defending the empire, essentially reconquest all the provinces in the HRE owned by non-HRE members, which is awesome. In terms of their ideas, Bohemia has a very nice set of ideas, not particularly strong in any directions other than stability. They start off with -10 advisor costs, which is a really solid one. It'll mean you can support your advisors easier. But they also have +10 imperial growth modifier. Now, sounds absolutely wonderful, but that modifier actually only applies when you're emperor, which is good. So again, it's to incentivize you to become the emperor. It's not as good as the Austrians, which I believe is 15% imperial growth modifier, but considering Austria and Bohemia are the only 2 in the game to have that modifier, clearly Paradox is indicating something. Your next one, you've got +3 tolerance of heretics, which won't help you that much if you stay Catholic, but if you switch to Protestant and you get rid of that -1 tolerance of heretics for being Catholic, you will then be able to tolerate all Christian religions, assuming your legitimacy is at 100. That also, if you go humanist ideas, it will mean you're pretty much tolerant of everybody, everywhere. It's almost equivalent to the Ottoman ideas, but it's just not as good. You won't be as tolerant of heretics, but not the worst thing. Or you can wait later on and do a declaration of indulgence. Actually, sorry, these are heathens. and do that. So you don't actually have to go humanist. You can just take this Declaration of Indulgence later on, and you'll tolerate Catholicism, Orthodoxy, the Reformed, and even Coptic, which can mean the Protestant Reformation and all those wonderful religious disasters that can fire will not affect you if you flip to Protestant pretty early on. Next, you've got an elective monarchy, which oddly enough actually doesn't work like an elective monarchy because the only elective monarchy is in Poland, and it doesn't actually work that way, even though in all honesty it somewhat should work that way. It's a little bit weird. Read about Bohemia, Czechoslovakia, Czechia, Slovakia's history to see that they had a lot of different monarchs from different dynasties on their throne over the decades. Then you have Wagenburg, which are essentially wagon forks, plus 5 infantry combat ability, which is nice, but the big one is the negative 5% shock damage received. Not a lot of nations have reduced shock damage as in their idea tree, and those that do usually have it a bit better, but the two combined mean that at least early on, you'll be pretty hard to kill. Obviously, shock falls off later as fire becomes stronger, but shock damage will keep your armies alive against cavalry, essentially, early on. Then you have Letter of Majesty, which gives -1 on rest. The big key is the Hussite Legacy, which will give you -10 tech cost, which is amazing. Not many nations have -10% tech cost. Quite a few have 5, and a lot of them have none. Nice. Then you get -10% stability cost, which is kind of a throwaway idea. It's good, yeah, but not the game breaker. One of the key things is you have Czech nationalism, plus 50% hostile core creation cost. This is rather strong. It decentivizes nations from taking your land, and if they do take your land, it makes it a lot harder for them to take a lot of it. Pretty good deterrence in multiplayer games from what I've seen, but the big thing is in single player it will deter the AIs to some degree from taking your land, because it might not look much, but a province that's 70 development for you would then be like, what, 120, 130 for the enemies. It can become really expensive to take your land. Even with absolutism and decreased coring costs, it still is a pain. And to finish off the Bohemian idea tree, you get +1 land leader fire, which is actually a nice finisher. I've grown to appreciate the plus leader abilities as I've played more. Essentially, you've got a lot of different options to do as Bohemia. In terms of idea groups, I recommend. Now, if you're going to play the diplomatic game and try and become HRE Emperor and keep it, you will probably have to do something about Austria in the long run. Either weaken them or whatever. Hope they fall under someone else's control. I don't know. They tend to get a huge diplomatic reputation boost later on when they get the Habsburg dominance ideas and stuff. But in the short run, you can compete with them. So you've got a choice between either diplomatic ideas, which will allow you to have another alliance with like an elector, plus they'll give you more diplomatic reputation, cheaper provincial war score cost, and just in general, cheaper diplomatic tech cost. It's important to note it will stack with your -10% tax cost when you get there. So that would be like -20% Diplo, which is really strong. Overall, it's a solid idea tree. If you want to just play diplomatic, that's good. If you want to expand and play diplomatic, go influence. Not only will you get more money from Silesia in the short run, but it's not a great idea. You will have a chance of a new heir and some prestige, which will help with your election. But you will also get cheaper annexation cost, which if you're vassalizing people or even getting unions, that will help you. But the key ideas are -20% reduced expansion impact. So I have now really come to the realization that if you want to expand rapidly at all, you need influence ideas to avoid coalitions, or you just have to become so large enough coalitions can't fight you, one or the other. But this will help you, especially in the HRE, where the expansion penalties are much more severe. You also get +2 diplomatic reputation and another diplomatic relations slot. Right there, those are the big 3 ideas from the influence. The finishers aren't that wonderful, but this will not only allow you to compete diplomatically within the HRE, but it will also allow you to expand within the HRE. Plus, since you start as a kingdom, you get an additional diplomat, so you don't really need the one from diplomatic ideas. If you become emperor, I believe you get another one. So I think after a reform or two are passed. So that's one idea. You go diplomatic. If you want to go a bit more expansionistic, but without the reduced aggressive expansion, I recommend most people take defensive ideas to start. You have a half-decent manpower pool and you can support some mercenaries, so you shouldn't be having too much trouble with manpower, so you don't need quantity. Quality is much more of a late game idea. Offensive ideas, at some point. Aristocratic ideas, probably not what you need to do, but it is important to note that if you do take aristocratic ideas, where is this one? You can get, and you take administration ideas, you can take licensing of the press and reduce the aggressive expansion, again, by 10% that way, which in the scheme of things is relatively useful if you don't take influence ideas, but requires 2 trees to get, so I don't know. I recommend defensive, gives you the army tradition, gives you the morale, and gives you the attrition. Overall, it also allows your forts to stand up better. Since you're in the HRE, everybody's going to get to your forts anyhow, so that's good. If you want to take administrative ideas, you can go economic for the inflation reduction to rein in your gold mine. Administrative if you're going to try conquering lands for the cheaper core costs. Humanist ideas is not kind of a necessity based off what I kind of mentioned earlier. You'll get really tolerant of Christians anyway. This will only make you slightly more tolerant of heathens and give you reduced separatism and more reduced unrest, but it's not a necessity. Religious ideas can be fun to do, especially if you go Protestant and everybody's still Catholic, but then of course you're likely to get a coalition anyway. Innovative's also rather strong. It stacks with your 10% to give you negative 20%. So strong, but not a game breaker. You're never going to need to take expansion or exploration because you're not really a colonizer. You're landlocked. The only way you could colonize would be break up here to Pomerania or south to Austria and then attempt to colonize from there, but the odds of you doing that before all the colonizers take all the good land is slim to none. And even if you do, you still have a very long way to go just to keep up with the colonizers. So, espionage ideas could be useful later on, mainly for the subject desire, diplomats, and the corruption, but not a game breaker. Trade ideas, not immensely useful. You do have a center of trade here, but there's a lot of other people in the trade node, plus all the trade is being pulled to Lubeck by Lubeck and the Hanseatic League. So I wouldn't recommend that early on. Maybe once you secured it. Maritime obviously is absolutely useless, as well as naval ideas. So you also get events and stuff that will give you stability in Bohemia, and just in general, Bohemia is a very stable country to play as. I recommend, if you want to do stuff, expand, you either go after Bavaria or Brandenburg earlier on. Saxony is usually not worth the effort of killing. Their land is relatively bad early on. Plus, they'll be a fairly loyal ally and won't expand too much, but of course you could kill them and the other people. Another trick to expand the HRE, if you attack somebody and you take all their land, might be cheaper and safer for you to vassalize them rather than take all their land yourself. You can always annex it later, especially if you've gone influence ideas and get the reduced annexation cost. Just be aware, of course, that you will receive huge penalties to all the electors and everything else. What else? Austria, in fact, can get a mission that will give them a union claim over you, so be aware of that. Try and get a couple allies. Also, don't let 5 electors vote for Austria, so one of the key things to do is to change your vote to pretty much anyone else in the HRE to prevent that from happening. That will cut off one of Austria's electors. Usually they will splinter. They're just all in support of it right now. But you voting for them is, of course, another vote they don't need to get. And since you can control your vote, you might as well do it. Make sure to switch it back to you when Podebrand takes over. It's relatively easy to become HRE Emperor, considering you count as not only a large nation, but you will have very solid legitimacy, half-decent prestige, and you'll be in the same culture group, sort of like Austria. So overall, very easy to form HRE Emperor. Later on, when Poland grows weaker, expanding into Poland is a very good choice. Other options to expand into Hungary. They tend to rival you and get events after you. Don't think you get events that give you claim on Hungary. At least I didn't see any in their current mission tree. But of course, this could easily change in the next DLC update. So we'll see. I kind of hope it does. If it does, they'll probably give you some claims on lands to yourself. In the meantime, expanding up north, you'll get missions for it. And then after that, the world is relatively your oyster. You cannot form Germany, and this is important to note. You don't count as, I don't believe you count in the Germanic culture area. I could double check this. But yeah, you're part of the West Slavic group. Czech, Silesian, and Polish. Even though you have a couple Saxon provinces, it's not good enough. I don't know why Austria can't form Germany, but they can't either. So, can't form Germany. If you want to form Germany or Prussia up here, you will have to cultural shift, which involves getting their culture more dominant in your lands than your own culture, and then whatever. It's doable. It's a viable strategy, but you don't need to. The Bohemians have one achievement, and that is literally called the Bohemians. As Bohemia, own Dublin as a core province. It's something that I haven't actually done, but it is a half decently easy one, especially if you control the HRE. Of course, it will involve going after England, so just be aware of that. Which means you'll need a navy, which is a pain, but you might be able to do it. Other things that's important to note. I think that's pretty much it. They're not a really hard nation to play. They're one of the easier nations in Europe. I'd say the easiest one in the HRE. Some people would say Austria. I'd say Austria is a little bit harder unless you really understand the diplomatic game, like unions and royal marriages and all that. But Bohemia can both play diplomatic and militaristic. They're a really fun nation. I liked playing with them. I did a silent Let's Play ages ago if anyone wants to check it out. I expanded to a very large size. But thank you guys all for watching. If you guys liked the video, please leave a like or subscribe. If you've got any recommendation for other guide videos, first go check the list of the other guides I have done for EU4. If it's not there, feel free to ask me to do a guide on a country. I've done one on pretty much all the major guides and some on idea groups and basic tutorials of the game. So, thank you guys all for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Check out my Let's Plays. I try to do one video a day, voiced, and I will see you guys all in another video. Bye for now.